Okay, so we're going to require some fits and starts. I try to use the juxtaposition or the moment when Galilean physics as dispatched of Aristotelian, Epicurean, Stoic, and Platonic physics as a point to enter into the thinking of deconstruction in the Heideggerian sense. And I believe we have to, we don't have to, but the one way to approach this, possibly we have to, is through Nietzsche. Possibly we have to move through Nietzsche to reach Heidegger. And of course, we know Leo Strauss has gone through Nietzsche to reach his position as well. So Nietzsche has proposed the question, why science? I don't know how that would be in German, maybe Warum Wissenschaft. I'm not sure exactly what he said there. Um, but the meaning of why here can shed some light on the situation in the sense that why stands prior to any talk of causality. And when we speak of causality, we have, as it were, a prejudice or a bias towards the notion of causality in the sense of something earlier uh, leads to something later. It rains and then the ground is wet. Somebody slams the door and then there's a loud retort. Something earlier is the cause for which there is later on an effect. But the question why um, was never in the tradition strictly laid out in this way. There's like a few statements in Aristotle that kind of do this, but Aristotle never sticks with it, and here or there along the tradition. But basically, the strict um, removal of this, I think the transliteration is something like AITIA, AITIA. Is that right? I believe that's how we transliterate the word, which we then translate or interpret as cause, but somewhat misleadingly because by usage, the word cause is more restricted um, for us, although, again, it still carries the ethical sense of the human moral cause. Let's forget about ethical or whatever. Let's just say the legal sense of the mens rea and the questions of is this person, as it were, of the age of reason from the Catholic point of view, like, which only means like 7 or 8 years old enough to know what's going on around one, um, to bear witness to something, and I guess from the modern legal standpoint, whether we're dealing with somebody who's mentally competent, who can be held culpable for their actions. So those are questions of who caused this to happen, and did they cause it through their will, through a human action, rather than cause simply through, say, in the Humean sense, that something happened earlier, something happened later, and we call that causality. And we, in addition, posit a strict connection between what happened earlier and what happened later. Um, cause, in the basic sense of the question why, is, as Nietzsche brings out, a question of, it's an extra moral question. But in saying that it's extra moral, we don't at the same time say that it's functional causality in the way I just laid out, and that we posit this strict connection between the thing that happened earlier and the thing that happened later, so that it's mechanical. I'll call that mechanical causation. Sometimes they call it instrumental. Um, the why in its ground is more open. So then we're thinking already at the beginning of the tradition, of course, like Strauss, like many others, say the fundamental decision is between poetry, as in Homer, somebody producing wisdom about normatives, about how one should act, and then on the other side, Socrates, Plato proposing wisdom in the sense that it's come through a conscious deliberation or dialectic of discussion where certain rules have been posited, such as that you can't say one thing, forget about it, and then say the reverse or say something else, so-called contradiction. So, like I said, we have to do some fits and starts and go into it kind of to get into this probabilistic or preparatory work in order to prepare ourselves and the universe to grab this allotment, which we would grab if we could enter into this thinking. So let's look at the question again of the inertial frame of reference and how this can be understood as a kind of founding myth. Why is it a founding myth if we're, for instance, dealing directly with experience of the way things happen in the world objectively in the sciences and nothing else comes in? So first of all, can we demonstrate that that's not so? So Francis Bacon, of course, makes a strict distinction between experience, which happens in our daily lives and which science regards as anecdote, and experiment, which means that we have some systematic guidelines, or what we could call a paradigm or a presupposition, or I was calling it an ideal hypothetical situation. So, for instance, within the inertial frame of reference, what is ideally hypothesized is the vacuum. So it's been said traditionally that nature abhors a vacuum. And there's a long debate between Hobbes and the chemist Boyle on this point. But the point is that Galileo runs with the notion of the vacuum, even though the vacuum doesn't, strictly speaking, exist. But he makes it into, like I was trying to give in the, as it were, simplistic example of the ruler, where we can always depend on gaining data in terms of inches or millimeters or whatever it is. With this notion of the vacuum, we can always gain data which whereby we say we're this far off from the vacuum, and the vacuum holds place for us, and we can always build upon that somehow in terms of going forward. So in this sense, the vacuum appears like a simile in the sense that when we work with a simile, so if you alter Shakespeare's metaphor and make it into a simile, all the world is like a stage, you have an image which stands forever, and which the world itself changes and undergoes all kinds of things happen to it, but that it's like a stage remains forever. So the simile holds us in this visionary, irrational space, as it were, outside of time. And likewise, the notion of the inertial frame of reference, which contains within itself the notion of the vacuum, the perfect vacuum, is like a simile. It holds outside of time, it always remains, and you can always build on it, and then you get these constant funny pronouncements from these guys that tell you, oh, well, Newton is still true.